and welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. I'm your host, Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold. It has been a brutal stretch of baseball for the Tigers, losing 12 of their last 14 games, but they won 10-4 on Sunday in the 4-game series finale against the Toronto Blue Jays, snapping a 6-game losing streak. The Tigers had a 1-6 record this week, 0-3 against the Pittsburgh Pirates at PNC Park, and 1-3 against the Blue Jays at Comerica Park. A lot has happened this week, including Troy Melton's MLB debut, Kerry Carpenter's return from the injured list, and Riley Green shaving his beard to leave only a mustache, and a lot of losing. All of that happened this week, but let's talk about the only positive news of the week. The Tigers won 10-4 this Sunday for their first win since last Sunday, all thanks to a big 3-run home run from Gleyber Torres. In the third inning, Gleyber Torres hit a 3-run homer off Max Scherzer, putting the Tigers ahead 3-0 on the scoreboard. Torres snapped an 0-for-16 stretch with that home run. The Tigers then added 7 runs against the Blue Jays bullpen in the 8th inning, with key hits from Parker Meadows, Javier Baez, Gleyber Torres, Matt Vierling, Riley Green, Spencer Torkelson, Dylan Dingler, and even a walk from Zach McKinstry. During this 14-game stretch, very rarely have the Tigers passed the baton from one hitter to the next. And by that, I mean they haven't been able to string together a series of good at-bats. That's exactly what they did in the 8th inning to take a 10-0 lead into the 9th inning. Like Chad Green and Justin Brule, those are not top-end relievers, guys that were coming out of the pen for the Blue Jays. And the Tigers punished them for 7 runs, which is exactly what their offense did against bad pitching for the first 90 games of the season. So it was good to see them get back to their old ways of passing the baton and annihilating bad pitching. We'll see if it continues into Monday when the Tigers begin a 3-game series against the Arizona Diamondbacks at Comerica Park. After that series, the trade deadline will be upon us. The trade deadline is Thursday, July 31st at 6 p.m. Eastern. That's an off day for the Tigers, but you better believe everyone is going to be glued to their phones in anticipation for definitely some bullpen upgrades and maybe a Eugenio Suárez. We'll get into all of that later in the show, including special guest Greg Jewett, an expert on relievers who joined to break down the trade market. The Tigers, despite their 2-12 record in the past 14 games, they have a 61-46 record throughout the entire 2025 season. That's 8 games ahead of the Cleveland Guardians, 8.5 games ahead of the Kansas City Royals, and 10 games ahead of the Minnesota Twins in the American League Central. The Tigers, though, have slipped among the American League teams, now trailing the Toronto Blue Jays by 2.5 games for the lead in the AL. So the Tigers, 2.5 off the lead in the AL, but they're still ahead of the Houston Astros by a half game and the New York Yankees by 3 games. Here's why that matters. If the regular season ended today, the Blue Jays and the Tigers would receive byes to the ALDS. Well, the Astros, Yankees, Red Sox, and Mariners would play in the wild card. But let's say the Astros were to jump the Tigers in the AL standings. Well, then the Blue Jays and the Astros would get the byes. And in this case, the Tigers would have to play the Mariners in a wild card round. That means in 3 games, the Tigers would face some combination of Brian Wu, George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, and Luis Castillo, all dominant starters for the Mariners. And I'll take Tarik Skubal against everybody. Everybody and anybody, whoever it is, I'm taking Tarik Skubal. But after that, I'd be really worried about the Mariners starting rotation. Or maybe it's a wild card round between the Tigers and the Red Sox, where Alex Bregman continues to haunt the Tigers. To be the Tigers, you want to avoid that wild card round at all costs, and that means being one of the top 2 teams in the AL at the end of the season. Right now, the Tigers are the number 2 team in the AL, but only a half game ahead of the Houston Astros. All right, let's get into the big 2. For the big 2 this week, we're joined by Chris Castellani of Chris & Company. Chris, thank you for helping me out this week. And man, wasn't it refreshing to see a Tigers win for the first time in a long time?
Yeah, I know, man. I mean, that was, I guess we're back to we're winning on Sundays, I guess, which is good. But boy, yeah, I would say probably the most worrisome week of the season in many ways. I mean, not to fearmonger, but I just think that the way things went down, and we were talking a little bit before we recorded, a lot of non-competitive baseball, a lot of ugly baseball this week. And so it does seem like hopefully after one win today, that's the beginning of a ship starting to be righted. And, a lot of questions that we have are going to get answered because the deadline's finally this week. So, they're going to have decisions to make, and hopefully they take them in a positive direction.
Hey, you were at the ballpark for the game. What were the vibes like there amongst the fans? Like, I'm in the clubhouse, right? So I'm seeing how the players are reacting. I'm seeing how AJ Hinch is reacting. And over this stretch, you've just been able to see it. Like AJ Hinch on his face, having to walk into that, post-game press conference day in, day out after another loss. And it's the same questions that he has to answer. Same thing for the players, right? And they're trying to stay optimistic, but you can tell that like after a certain point, it's really starting to tug at them. For the fans, when you're out there at the ballpark, like pregame, what was it like? I mean, is everybody freaking out, or do you think the majority of people are like, okay, this will eventually turn?
I wouldn't say freaking out. I would say it was a bit more mellow. Like it was a good crowd there today, and it has been pretty much throughout this entire summer. But I remember when I was the last time I was on here was after the Sunday night game against Minnesota. Maybe it's partially because it was a night game, but like that was just a big party. Like people were out there early. It was a Scooble day. It almost felt like in a lot of ways that game was like a coronation, just for the team. They were on national TV. This was one of those like, look, people are happy to be there. Many people still believe in the team, but there was kind of a nervous energy of like, okay, look, if we're going to snap out of this, we better do it pretty quickly. And I think that there was a huge literal and figurative sigh of relief when Gleyber's, home run went over the fence of just like, that's really the swing that they've been needing for probably about 10 games now that they finally were able to get. Now it wasn't until the 8th inning when they got anything beyond that, but I think that was such a huge, potentially turning point just in the season because it'll be forgotten now. Scherzer was on the verge of pitching out of second and third, no out. And so for Gleyber to come up with that swing, huge turning point. And I also think the really gutsy, good start by Jack Flaherty was inspiring today. So it was not just a return to victory, but a return to winning in ways that they've won pretty much all season.
Much needed for Jack Flaherty, much needed for Gleyber Torres. Let's get into the big two. Question one of the big two. The Tigers have a 61-46 record and they're 8 games ahead of the Cleveland Guardians in the American League Central, but they've lost 12 of their last 14 games. If the panic meter has 3 levels, high, medium, low, where are you at with 55 games remaining in the regular season?
Very much medium, because I think that I still feel good about the division as a whole, in large part because, and of course, with the way they've been playing, it's just natural. And I fall victim of this, of, using those buzzwords, free fall, collapse. Well, the thing is, a collapse is a two-way street because you need another team in your division to step up the way Detroit did a year ago. Like I know Minnesota completely fell apart, but it also took Detroit going 33-11 for that just to become a storyline. I don't see any other team in this division stepping up to the plate, literally and figuratively, the way that Detroit did a year ago. 8 games, still a relatively comfortable lead. I think that they're in a good spot. The reason it is medium is simply because, and some questions will be answered here, come deadline time. I think that there are some units on this team or some pieces on this team that have been wildly productive and have probably reached their apex. Like and I'm not, I'd feel almost bad because I like so many of these guys, but I don't think the all-star version of Zach McKinstry is something that's going to last 162 games. We've already seen, even though we had the big swing in the 8th today, a big regression from Javi Baez, really coming up on about 2 months now. And even beyond that, their bullpen needs a complete reworking that I don't know how fixable that is just with one deadline at this point. Unless you can find a way to get the first 2 months version of Tommy Kahnle or the first, 2 month version of Brant Herter, there's not a lot of depth in this pen. And unless every starter is going to go 6 or 7 innings, I think that this is going to be an issue that's going to exist regardless of whether or not they add at the deadline. So I think it is, I put it at medium still because I think I like where they're at in the division, but I think expectations have changed a little bit because just as a fan, there were points of the first 90 plus games where you thought to yourself, like, maybe this is that magic year. Like maybe this is the new, like the reincarnated version of what 84 was for many people. And I think the last 2 weeks have shown that, look, they get the most out of this roster, but the flaws are still apparent. And while they'll try to address some of them at the deadline, it might not be enough.
When it comes to the division for me, you look at the American League Central, like my panic meter is low there. But then when you look at running that entire race, getting into the postseason, getting beyond where they were last year, right? They fall in the American League Division Series. Well, can you get to the ALCS? Can you get to the World Series? Do you have a shot to finally win this thing for the first time since 84? Like early in the year, yeah, it seemed that way. And then the Tigers go on this stretch and it's like, maybe not. So my panic meter very, very low in the AL Central because I don't think that they have a chance to lose this division. Like I don't think Cleveland's catching up to them. I don't think Kansas City's catching up to him. Minnesota, no way. Like you got Cleveland's talking about dealing Clase. Twins are talking about dealing, Johan Duran. Now, I don't think either of those guys are actually going to get moved, but still, like they're putting it out there. Like, you gave us a package we can't refuse. we'll give you those guys. So I think when you have those teams that are already essentially out of the race, I just don't see how the Tigers can fall off that hard. But my panic meter is high when it comes to the ultimate goal, winning the World Series, right? Like you see what they did, and we talk about it, right? The non-competitive losses, you go back to the 13-game span, right? I'm going to take this from OptaStats on X. The Tigers became the only team in modern era to have a 13-game span where they were outscored by 50 or more, out-hit by 50 or more, had fewer than 25 extra base hits, and struck out 125 times or more. That is the only team in the modern era to do that in a 13-game stretch. That was the Tigers going into Sunday's game. Like, it was just the way in which it happened. And to your point, Zach McKinstry is not going to do what first half Zach McKinstry did for the rest of the season. Look at his career. Same thing with Javier Baez. Look at the last 3 years of Javier Baez. How do we expect him to be an all-star the rest of the way? Even Dylan Dingler, remember how hot he was early in the year? He's already cooled off, right? There's a reason why he didn't end up being in that all-star mix, because he eventually cooled off. So there's a lot of these guys that, sure, you're confident that as bad as Riley Green has been, he's going to come out of it, right? Spencer Torkelson, he's still hitting bombs. Gleyber Torres, he's as steady as ever. Kerry Carpenter, we know the kind of impact that he makes, even though maybe it's been a down year from a hitting standpoint. Like, he's still got the pop. He's still a left-handed bat that, the opposing managers have to manage against. And beyond that, though, like, what do you really trust offensively? Can you trust Parker Meadows? Can you trust Matt Vierling? Can you really trust Colt Keith? Maybe a little bit, but he's not going to give you the power that you think he's eventually going to develop into, at least not right now. So you look up and down the lineup and it's like Riley Green, Spencer Torkelson, Gleyber Torres, Kerry Carpenter. And then what else do you really got? To your point, the bullpen, it's in shambles.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I think that is something, just going back to the offense real quick, there is this boomer bust element that just concerns me in general. We associate it with Riley Green, but I think that Colt Keith is every bit as guilty of it, and even Torque to a certain extent. And we saw some better swings on Sunday, but I think one of the big reasons why this team had this resurgent run in the latter part of last season was that Parker Meadows became, for a brief time, the Parker Meadows that they hoped he could be. This year, obviously, dealt with a lot of injury issues and inconsistency, but him and Matt Vierling were two key pieces of this ball club a year ago that have been really non-productive. And with Vierling, I don't think he's really even remotely close to healthy, given just the way he looks at the dish right now, and how much can you expect out of him? But those guys are still young-ish players that are starting to get more reps. You think there's possibility that they find something? I mean, you've already seen, I'm not going to call it panic, it's just what you have to do, but they have spun the wheel of free agent relievers, just hoping to find somebody who can give them some good frames. And I don't want to bury a guy after one inning, or actually less than that, but I mean, I don't think Luke Jackson gave AJ much confidence. Carlos Hernandez is gone at this point. It's like, that is the weakest unit that you have. And I think I said it last time I was on here, but in many ways, I think that this has been the worst case scenario for this pen, just because nobody thought Brisky would fall off like this. Nobody expected the Foley injury. Lang is this big mystery box, but we're coming up on this point in the season where, like, even if he gets called up and pitches well, the sample size is going to be pretty darn small, even if he gets called up in the next few weeks here. So yeah, that's the biggest issue that plagues this team, and we've seen it here before, but it's reared its ugly head again.
All right, so is your panic meter the same as mine when it comes to like the big picture, winning the World Series? Like, I mean, obviously I can take and I can point to, let's talk about the Los Angeles Dodgers. They just won the World Series, and they lost 10 of 12 games, and they bounced back by winning 3 of their next 6. Like, the Dodgers went through a stretch where they lost 10 of 12 games. The Tigers have lost 12 of 14 games. So, like, really good teams lose. Now, the Dodgers and the Tigers, when you look at it from a talent standpoint, I mean, I'll take the Dodgers roster all day long, and that's no disrespect to the players and the Tigers, but Dodgers just won the World Series, and look how many Hall of Famers they have on their roster, right? So are you panicking in the same way I am when it comes to the ultimate goal of winning the World Series? Like, does this stretch deter you from thinking we have a chance?
If that's the mirror, which is, being the last team standing, then yeah, it is a high amount of concern. But I would also argue, even before the stretch, I still kind of felt that way, just because you bring up teams like the Dodgers and Philly and New York and the National League. I think where I do still hold out hope is that, I think it's been made very clear that over 162, this will not be the best team in baseball. But where I hold out hope is the fact that I think the best team in the American League right now is the team you just played. And as good as the Blue Jays have played, they were not in the playoffs last year. They have not, I think, won a playoff game since 2016. So it's an experienced group, but, in the sense that they've been to the postseason, but they haven't won anything there. They've gotten production from some guys that they did not expect. Gosman's found it again. Barrios has had another good year. Who's the Eric Lauer out of nowhere? Is that sustainable? George Springer's turned the clock back 6 years. This is a roundabout way of saying, I think they benefit from the fact this is a very vulnerable American League. Even as good as a team like the Blue Jays is, and they probably are the best team right now, I don't think that there is a Goliath in the AL the way that, let's be honest, Houston probably was that team for about 7 or 8 years. And that's not to say Houston can't make it to and win the World Series. They can, but it's a much different version of the Astros. And so let's say that you get through that vulnerable American League. Then you get into a 7-game series against one team where, any assortment of things could happen. So when I look at things from a bigger picture and assess the rosters and kind of how they're performing, I think that, especially when I view where the bullpen's at, concern level is high for them being potentially the last team standing. I very rarely throughout the season ever really view them as a World Series caliber team, even when they were playing great. My opinion has definitely changed just because so much of the good juju and so much of the kind of surprising production that they got in the first 90 plus games of the season has definitely not been there over the last few weeks. And in a lot of ways, like you brought up McKinstry, I don't think it's coming back.
Last thing on these 14 games, the Tigers ranked last in MLB with a 6.62 ERA and last in MLB with a 5.83 OPS. That is over the last 14 games. What are you more worried about becoming a trend? Because for me, it's the ERA. And I'm not talking about the Tigers are going to be last in MLB in ERA for the rest of the season. That's not what I'm talking about. But when you talk about, hey, are they going to be a bottom 15 offense in baseball or a bottom 15 pitching staff in baseball? I worry a little bit more about the pitching staff and the offense, which is crazy to say, but when you look at where the bullpen is at, and you talk about it at the trade deadline, if they're only going to make, one move for a mid-tier reliever and that's what they're going to go with, or even if they go out and get 2 relievers and they're not the elite relievers that they really need, I don't trust this bullpen at all. And then on top of that, you have Tarek Skubal, but again, Jack Flaherty, as gutsy as the performances he had on Sunday, what's Jack Flaherty been for you this year? He's got a 4.51 ERA in 21 starts. It's been brutal for Jack Flaherty. And Casey Mize, is Casey Mize really the all-star caliber pitcher that we saw in the first half of the season? Or is he more of a guy who might hover around a 3.5 to a 4 ERA? And you're confident in Reese Olson. But then aside from that, it's you're going to throw Kiter Montero? You're going to throw Sawyer Gibson Long? You're going to go with Troy Melton? Who's going to be that guy in the bullpen? Or in the rotation, excuse me. So that's where my big concern comes in, is it's almost the pitching more than the offense, which maybe I'm jumping the gun saying that, and maybe it's just recency bias because they've struggled so much. But at the same time, it's Tarek Skubal and Reese Olson and Will Vest. And then who else are you really confident in? At least on offense, I can say, hey, you know what? We know Riley's going to get hot eventually. We know Torque is going to hit some homers. We know Gleyber's going to be steady. Colt Keith, yes, we want more out of Colt Keith, but he'll get the job done. Kerry Carpenter's going to run into some home runs. I feel there's enough on offense where I can say, okay, I can believe. But from the pitching staff, Tarek Skubal, Reese Olson, Will Vest, and who else you got?
Yeah, to take it kind of one step further, let's say from a starting standpoint, this rotation does come into form and Jack pitches the way he did today. And Reese, I generally think is pretty darn good. Or that Mize, we get the first half version of him. They're not pitching 8 innings every start. You're going to have to get to somewhere between 9 to 15 outs, from this bullpen. And right now, I don't know how trustworthy any one of these guys is outside of maybe Vest, despite the bad outing that he had against Toronto. So no, I see your point. It's crazy that you bring up those numbers because you in between that 6 point something ERA, run, you had 2 dominant Tarek Skubal starts. You remove those, we're probably talking ERA of 8, 7 something. It's probably been worse than that. And now they had a shutout going with 2 outs in the 9th today and then blew that. So it probably blows things up a little bit. But yeah, no, I would say that's probably where it stands. I think that when you get to October, given the way that things work and with the off days, you need probably 3 really trustworthy relievers. Now, I do think that, and again, maybe it's more just a glass half full on my part. I do think Holton's kind of found it again. And there is such a huge weapon there because he's basically an extension of your starter in a lot of ways with the way he pitches. You can maybe get 2 innings out of him. But yeah, what's been lacking and what we've noticed with this team being an issue is what's been there all year. And it's going to continue to be that way until they make moves.
Question 2 of the big 2, as a fan, as a baseball fan, as somebody who analyzes this game, what do you want the Tigers to do at the trade deadline set for 6 p.m. Thursday, July 31st. I've reported the Tigers will be buyers, but they are expected to take a conservative approach at the trade deadline, maybe targeting some mid-tier relievers as the primary upgrade. The Tigers don't plan to trade any of their 5 top 100 prospects, Kevin McGonigal, Max Clark, Bryce Rayner, Jose Briseño, and Thyron Lorenzo. They want long-term sustainability. The Tigers also aren't viewing this as an all-in push to win the World Series in 2025. Now, we know Tarik Skubal's window is closing quickly. The Tigers only have him for 2 more World Series chances, 2025 and 2026. After that, he becomes a free agent. So we've outlined what the Tigers are planning to do. But as we sit here right now, Chris, what do you want them to do? As a fan of this team, knowing this franchise hasn't won the World Series since 1984, but also knowing what it would be like to build a dynasty like the Houston Astros.
My dream deadline would be multiple relievers and Eugenio Suárez. I think that we will get half of that. I do think they're going to make the moves at the deadline to get relievers. I think that Harris and Hinch, these guys have seen enough with the way that the bullpen has pitched this year, especially the last several weeks, that they can't stand pat and expect, great success going forward if you're going to have, Canely pitching is 7th or 8th inning anymore. I just don't think that's the case. It's weird because you posted that article and nothing that you wrote in it, in terms of the Scott Harris's quotes, surprised me. I never figured that they were going to come away from this saying, oh, Clark is on the table, McGonigal's on the table. This is still part of a upward trend, I think, in terms of the way that Scott Harris looks at this. I don't think that he views this as fully operational. This is 100% my team until those guys arrive, especially Briseño, Clark, and McGonigal. I didn't think that they were ever going to be available for trades. The Suárez thing, I don't think it happens. I think maybe they inquire about him. I don't think he comes to Detroit, but I do think it's more likely than people might let on, simply because we have seen time and time again the return or what you have to offer for essentially 50 games of a really good hitter at the deadline is often relatively underwhelming. And we've seen the prime example here, which is the JD Martinez trade back in 2017, the return that the Tigers got for that. But there's been other examples. Suárez is a wonderful hitter, but he doesn't have much team control, only 50-something games left. He's in a contract year, and he is admittedly having, at least outside of the juiced ball season in 19, easily the best year of his career. I think that is attainable. I think that is something that you could go out and get honestly, I think even without potentially moving one of your top 5 guys. I do think that's a legit possibility. You might have to package in quite a few. It might have to be 3 or 4 pieces that, the Diamondbacks can make a project out of, but that would be my dream, just because something, and I'm surprised I haven't mentioned this already, but this team, despite the addition of Gleyber and everything, I still have very little trust against left-handed pitching. There's still a lot of concern there with the way that Green and Carp and Colt Keith match up against lefties. I think Suárez completely stabilizes this team, and you don't have a lot of years of team control where you feel like you have to give up some of your key pieces of the future. So that's where I stand on it. That would be my dream. I think they come away with it with just bullpen help. I think there's a possibility that they make a move for a starter. I think that maybe the Jack's performance today maybe have influenced a little bit, that they feel like they can still squeeze a little bit more juice out of that rag. But I think that would be my dream. But ultimately, I think we come away from this with probably 2 relievers, and that's it.
Let's talk about Suárez, and we'll get into the relievers, because you talk about Suárez and maybe what it might take to get him. I thought the same thing, but then I went and I looked at, what does the trade market actually look like? And Eugenio Suárez is the best bat available. It is Eugenio Suárez, and then it is Ryan O'Hearn, and then it is Marcell Ozuna. That is it. There really isn't a whole lot out there. Marcell Ozuna, he can't play the field. He's DH only. So you look at what's actually out there to acquire, Suárez is the guy. And so obviously the Diamondbacks right now are asking a ton. Yeah, the Tigers are a fit, but so are the Chicago Cubs, Cincinnati Reds, Houston Astros, now that Isaac Paredes has gone down with an injury, Milwaukee Brewers, Philadelphia Phillies, Seattle Mariners, all of those teams and other teams could be right there in the mix for Eugenio Suárez. The Yankees, they were kind of the best fit for him, and they moved on. They traded for Ryan McMahon, Colorado Rockies third baseman. Tigers were not interested in him. Tigers also not interested in Pittsburgh Pirates third baseman Ke'Bryan Hayes. But Eugenio Suárez there's a chance. There's a chance that could happen, right? And so the question becomes, what are you willing to actually give up to get him? What is it going to cost? It sounds like the Diamondbacks want one of those top 100 prospects. I don't think the Tigers are going to give it up. And so I think that might be where there is that gap when it comes to those trade talks. And, again, that's for Scott Harris, president of baseball operations, to essentially decide, what is Suárez worth? This is the guy who he's hitting 250 with 35 plus home runs, leading the league in RBIs. over a 900 OPS. Like he's been outstanding. And also, by the way, everyone, kind of craps on his defense, but -3 defensive runs saved in more than 850 innings at third base. Zach McKinstry, -5 defensive runs saved in just 405 innings at third base. So according to defensive run saves, Eugenio Suárez is a better defensive third baseman than Zach McKinstry. And obviously we know Suárez is a more dangerous hitter. So the question becomes for the Tigers, like, do you give up a Jose Briseño or a Thyron Lorenzo just to like get the deal done? And I don't think they go there. The question then becomes, what about Troy Melton and Enrique Jimenez? What about Max Anderson and Jaden Ham? Like, are you able to package two of those guys together to go out and get a Suárez? Because that is that big bat in your lineup. You go and you look at what they did in the offseason, right? They went out and they signed Gleyber Torres. Who are they still hunting? Alex Bregman, because they knew they needed Alex Bregman in their lineup the same way that I'm sure they know Eugenio Suárez would make a huge difference in their lineup. So does a Troy Melton and Enrique Jimenez get it done? Does a Max Anderson and Jaden Ham get it done? Could those be options that the Diamondbacks would say, okay, yeah, like let's have a conversation with that. Maybe you throw one more piece in there and you're able to get a deal done. I think that is more likely. But again, it sounds like the Tigers won't give up one of those top 100 prospects. And Chris, if you were in Scott Harris's chair, like, would you give up Jose Briseño for 50 games of Eugenio Suárez? Would you give up Thyron Lorenzo for 50 games of Eugenio Suárez, knowing what he can bring? Or are you not doing that at all?
Lorenzo's the only one of that group I'd consider, but probably not. No, I mean, I think it would be bizarre for them to acquire Lorenzo and then immediately ship him to another team a year after. Like, I think that they got him with the perception that this is going to be a long-term piece for us. I actually have a question for you just because it's a piece that's been thrown out, but is it safe to say at this point that Jace Young is viewed as damaged goods? Because this was a guy who was a year ago at this time a top 100 prospect. And I have had people ask me, like, could he be a piece of a potential trade that you could sell to Arizona as, hey, third baseman for a third baseman, air quotes, but he has not been great in AAA from what I know. Really pretty ugly sample size at the big league level. Is at this point, is his stock dropped to a point where he's probably not somebody that you could see being a piece of that deal?
Yeah, I think it's the same as like the Matt Manning conversation once upon a time, right? Like, other teams are able to look at this and they're able to see exactly the same things that the Tigers are seeing, right? So why isn't Jace Young in the big leagues? Well, it's because he's not a big league player, right? And that's just the truth of it, right? And maybe he can get there at a certain point. And I don't want to knock Jace Young because I think there are a lot of tools that he has that I really like. I mean, he grinds out at bats like nobody else. He does a really good job of drawing walks. I think there is power in there once he's able to get the swing off. We haven't seen it at all in the big leagues. So to this point, he's not a big league player. And I think the Diamondbacks look at him the exact same way. And there's a number of guys. I mean, again, I think from the outside looking in, a lot of times people like to just say, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but I think people like to just say, hey, trade this player, that player, another player. Like, they're not on our team right now. They're in AAA and like they're getting old. Just trade them and like we can get Suárez back. And it's like, no, it's not that easy because, if you're the Diamondbacks, you don't want any of those players, right? Like, if you're going to give something up, you got to get something back, right? And that's what it really comes down to. So the Diamondbacks are going to give up Eugenio Suárez. They're going to want a real dude or multiple dudes back. And that's where I think, again, like a Troy Melton or a Max Anderson or a Jaden Ham or an Enrique Jimenez, like, package two of those four players together. And maybe you got something, and then maybe you throw in like, some guy from the DSL or the Florida Complex League, and you just throw them in on top, and there's like a 3-for-1 type of a trade. But I do think the big thing is going to be the bullpen, and it's going to be what are the Tigers actually going to do? Because David Bednar is out there. Ryan Helsley is out there. Raisel Iglesias is out there. Like, there are options for the Tigers to really improve this bullpen. They're not going to trade within the division, so we're not going to see Manuel Clase or Johan Duran. But again, David Bednar, Ryan Helsley, Raisel Iglesias, those guys would make significant differences in this Tigers bullpen. And the Tigers say that they want to replicate what they did last year. We saw Sean Gunther come up and Brendan Hanifee come up and Bo Blisky, right? And they created that postseason magic. And maybe this year it's Drew Summers and Alex Lang and Tyler Madison. But the reality is, like, it cannot be a one-man show with Will Vest. And again, you were right about, Tyler Holton, two-man show with Will Vest and Tyler Holton, let's just say. They need a legit guy back there who can shut down games. And you're looking at a Bednar, a Helsley, and Iglesias. Like, there's no question that is the number one priority, right?
100%. And I think not only the highest priority, but I think the one that just makes the most sense for not just the Tigers, but whatever team is trading these respective guys. Like, I think Bednar, and maybe it's just because we got a good sample size of him in the most recent series against Pittsburgh. I think checks off pretty much every box, really good, efficient strike thrower. high swing and miss guy. His actually underlying numbers are actually better than his ERA. I mean, he's actually got a sub-2 FIP this season. I mean, he's been really, really good. All three of the guys that you just mentioned there, various degrees, hard throwers, various degrees, swing and miss guys. I would be a bit more hesitant on Iglesias just because I think that he's starting to reach kind of the twilight stages of his career. And even this season, well, the underlying numbers indicate he's been a little bit better. He's got a negative WAR. He's got a +5 ERA at this point. Has not been great for the Braves. But yeah, I mean, I think that those pieces that have been thrown out there, I do see them acquiring one of those guys. I guess with the Cardinals, have they made it like fully known that they are going to be selling in some capacity, just because that they were playing good baseball there for a while and then they've kind of just been hovering. And I think they're one of those teams that they don't like to sell. And I think they view it as kind of a last resort for them. But if he's available at Helsley, I mean, this is one of the hardest throwing, relievers in the entire sport. And not only that, like, he is the definition of a ninth inning guy. Like, you bring him in, like, he's, he can close games for you, high leverage games in the postseason. But if those guys are available, given the team control that they have, or in some cases lack thereof, I don't think that it would require a huge, package of prospects. Let's see, Bednar is a free agent after 26. So you get him for a year and a half. I think that'd be a pretty good move.
What do you think about the Tigers trying to replicate in some way, shape, or form pitching chaos, right? I mentioned, we saw Sean Gunther come up and Brendan Hanafy and Bo Brisky. Like, those guys were so clutch in 2024. And now maybe they're going to try to call on guys like Drew Summers and Alex Lang and Tyler Madison, maybe even. And yes, the Tigers are going to be buyers at the deadline. And yes, you can expect them to add at least one reliever, maybe two relievers, but definitely one. That still doesn't solve like all the problems though, right? Like, just because you add one guy or two guys, like, that's not going to fix everything. So do you think that pitching chaos in a way is repeatable, or do you think that's kind of a pipe dream and maybe that's kind of a red flag to be cautious about?
It's not repeatable the way that it was last year.
Because it was unbelievable. It was magical.
Right. We're talking about a historic run in which every single piece of your bullpen was pitching efficient baseball for the better part of 2 months with sometimes 1.5 legitimate starters, right? It was Tarek Skubal and then whatever bullpen is. I don't see not just the Tigers replicating that success. It might be years before we see any team replicate that kind of success with that level of efficiency. I think that you can recreate it in some capacity. I think every fifth day, if you want to roll with something like that, or if in the playoffs, every, 2 of every 4 games, try something like that, because you are going to need bullpen pieces. I guess last season, with the guys they called up, they got very fortunate. Guys were pitching good baseball. Like, Herter comes up to the big leagues right away and starts pitching efficiently. Let's say they add 2 relievers and all of a sudden you have a deeper, better pen. I also think whether it's Lang or one of the young guys who hasn't pitched yet that you just brought up, or, who knows, with somebody like Brisky where he's at, one of these guys who has not been particularly good this year is going to have to find it again. And I don't know who that's going to have to be. I mean, we keep kind of holding out hope for this, I keep using this phrase, but this mystery box with Alex Lang. But people forget, they sent Alex Lang down before he got injured.
And you know what, Chris? He's still not throwing strikes.
Right. And the thing is, and that's why I brought up the sample size. Like, if he comes in and in his first 8-10 appearances before the month of September, his ERA is low, but he's still walking the leadoff guy every inning, AJ's not going to use him in high leverage. Like, it's not a guy, or at the very least, it's not a guy you can trust in high leverage. So I think what made that run so unique last year is that every one of those guys was so efficient that it led to a bullpen that was bizarrely fresh for a heavy majority of that run, despite the usage. I don't see them repeating that again, but I do think that you have the ability to put together a pen that's at least formidable in a playoff situation.
Yeah, I think the bullpen as a whole looks pretty tired. Definitely need some upgrades there, and a whole lot of luck down the stretch if they're going to roll with this same group. All right, Chris, thank you for helping us out this week. It's always fun to chop it up with you. Let's do this again soon.
Yeah, of course. Have me on anytime, man.
Everyone, that was Chris Castellani from Chris & Company. Next up, we are going to take a deep dive into the trade market for relievers with bullpen expert Greg Jewett. But first, let's take a break. Everyone, I'd like to welcome Greg Jewett, an expert in relievers and bullpens, to the Days of Roar podcast for the first time. He often contributes to The Athletic, where he writes about fantasy baseball, and you can find him on X at GJEWETT9. Greg, thank you for joining me.
Of course, the pleasure and the honor is all mine. I appreciate Nick referring me to you and hope I don't disappoint.
Yeah, Nick Pollock said Greg Jewett's the guy. He is the bullpen guy. Nick Pollock might be the starting pitcher guy, but there's no doubt, Greg, you are the bullpen guy. Look, the trade deadline is Thursday, July 31st. That's just a few days away. We're going to get into the Tigers soon, but what are your expectations of the bullpen market as a whole?
I think even though a couple of teams have dipped their toes in the water, I think it'll be a slow moving market because there's a lot of, this guy's available. And then, we have to be blown away, as you're seeing with the news on Emmanuel Clase today. I really don't think Cleveland's going to trade Clase. It's nice to talk about it, but it makes more sense to do it in the offseason where you can get everybody involved, not just a few teams. So I really believe that the 1-year rentals are going to start flying off the shelves. Once the first domino goes, I think you'll see it. But most of the executives and people seem to believe that it's all going to kind of happen on Thursday, which is going to make for a scrambled day for me covering relievers as I keep a deadline tracker open all day. And every time there's a move, I just kind of encapsulate it as quick as I can and get it posted. But yeah, Thursday is going to be a day of overwhelmment. But I think it's going to be a busy one for relievers. All these teams are looking for bullpen depth because you got to be able to shorten a game in the postseason or quell a rally at that highest leverage moment, even if it's in the 6th inning. So you've got to be prepared and you've got to have that depth in there to handle those situations with winner go home situations.
To build on your point about Emmanuel Clase, right? Like we always hear about these controllable relievers that teams are listening on. Guys like Mason Miller, Emmanuel Clase, Johan Duran, Griffin Jacks, Cade Smith, like guys with plenty of team control left. They've been mentioned this year. And even someone like David Bednar, who's a free agent after the 2026 season. So he still has 1.5 years of team control remaining. My point is we always hear that teams are listening to offers for these players, but it seems like they never move. We heard that in the past with Alex Lang and Jason Foley, but the Tigers never traded them. Is that kind of an accurate representation of the situation for controllable relievers? And if so, why don't more teams move controllable relievers at the trade deadline?
I think it's perception. They don't want to let down the fan base. Like Bednar is unique because he's from the Pittsburgh area. So it makes it very hard to trade a guy who comes out to a Steelers song as his entry to the 9th inning. But I think this year they have to do it. I mean, if you're serious about building for next year and beyond around Paul Skeens and all the young pitching that they have, I think you really need to cash in. I believe this Thursday is a time where you can really sell high on some of these relievers, especially the ones with control. I don't know if Johan Duran or anyone of that ilk is going to get moved. I think Minnesota is kind of just dipping their toes in the water to see what they might be able to mine for him or Jax. And even if they made a trade, I think it's only one of the two, not both. But yeah, it's very hard to justify, especially teams are always saying, you want to think you can compete the next year. So giving away relievers with control without getting a haul, it's a bad look for the front office. They're always nervous about that sort of a thing.
So with that being said, who do you think are the most likely controllable relievers to be traded at this year's trade deadline? Whether you think they're good fits for the Tigers or not. And by the way, we know the Tigers don't plan to trade with an AL Central team. It doesn't sound like Scott Harris, the president of baseball operations, likes trading within the division. So Tigers fans don't expect Emmanuel Clase or Johan Duran or Cade Smith or Griffin Jacks, but maybe one of those guys could be on the move.
It's possible. I would say maybe one of those four gets traded. I really think Cleveland is looking at the standings and thinking that, with the schedule they have remaining, they believe they can probably get back into this. The only way they would give up Smith or Clase is if they got a bat that they just couldn't refuse. So I do believe Bednar will get moved this time. I think Pittsburgh's pretty serious about trading him and even Dennis Santana. Philadelphia was asking about the two of them as a tandem about a week ago. That's kind of shifted, but I think there's a lot of teams circling around Bednar, and if they can't get one of those AL Central relievers you talked about, I think Bednar is plan B for a lot of teams. And then all of a sudden now we're getting into the domino effect that we were talking about that'll happen on Thursday. Once one ship goes, then that cavalcade just kind of flows down.
All right, let's dig into the Tigers. I want to start here. We know that the Tigers are seeking bullpen upgrades. That is the number one priority at the trade deadline, even more so than a power hitting third baseman or a starting pitcher to help with some of the deficiencies that they've had in that area this season. So as you evaluate and you look at the Tigers, what do you think they need to do at the trade deadline as it pertains to the bullpen?
Well, as you and I spoke offline about, and you've been writing about this since the beginning of the season, that the team has been seeking out relievers with the ability to create whiffs. Detroit ranks dead last without counting games played today as a team reliever in that category on Fangraphs. It's called swing strike percentage. They're 30th out of 30 teams with a percentage below 10 as a team as a whole. I mean, the team leaders will vest with 12.9, and there's nothing wrong with a 12.9, but the league average, when you look at everybody, the league average in swing strike percentage for a reliever is 11.3. So, I mean, he's slightly above league average, but he's the only one that's in double digits that's on the current roster. So they need people that I believe have some experience and can handle closing games if they have to. I've seen AJ Hinch kind of likes to be fluid at the back end of games, and whether he's going to assign lineup pockets after the trade deadline or however he wants to handle it, like he did in the playoffs. So I really think they need to get two veterans that are capable of getting whiffs as we've spoken about. So that narrows the field. So when I did my searching for you and I made the nice little spreadsheets and all those wonderful things, I really focused on swing strike percentage. So I do believe David Bednar could be a very good fit for you guys. I just don't know if the front office will pay the prospect capital that'll take to get him, especially when you're going to start competing with all of the other teams at the top once they get involved. Like I said, if all of those other controllable relievers go off of the market, it makes Bednar's even stronger because you're not just getting them now, you can keep them through next year, even if you're going to use them in the 8th inning. So you get a team like the Mets with their cache of, minor league pitching prospects, they get involved in things of that nature. I think it's going to be hard for Detroit to match or beat what they might be willing to offer in that instance. So I was kind of going a little further down. I know people might be disappointed, but Raisel Iglesias has been very good in recent outings. I know he had the blown save the other day. It's like just when we started to trust him, he hung a slider against the Yankees, and he's given up 6 of his 8 home runs on the slider. And he had been using this slider only about 10% of the time in recent outings, but he had a elongated scoreless streak. And let me just flip to my little notes on Raisel. But since June 9th, he's appeared in 18 games with 16 strikeouts against 3 walks, a 0.78 whip. So that's less than a base runner per outing. A 22.2 hard hit percentage allowed, which is very good. And in your home ballpark, a couple of those home runs that went out probably would have died at the wall. But the key factor here is a 16.9 swing strike percentage. His changeup still generates a lot of whiffs, and I know that's the main thing that helps Tommy Kahnle, but there's a little more variance in his arsenal, and he can get a fastball by you when he needs to. And he pitched very well in the 8th inning when the Braves trade for him ahead of Kenley Jansen during their deep playoff run. So I think this would be a good clubhouse fit because Raisel Iglesias isn't going to come in there and say, I want the ball in the 9th inning. I think he would just get there and be like, what does it take to win? And that's what you want in the clubhouse. And I think he would be a very good fit for your team. I think Phil Maton, once the Cardinals open up shop for their trades, he's on an expiring contract. Maton, 38.1 innings this year, 14.4 swing strike percentage. His curve gets a swing strike rate above 20%. He has 2 other pitches that get a swing strike rate in double digits. So, again, he didn't do great with the Mets last year in the playoffs, but I think he was a little bit fatigued coming back from injury. That's another guy. So, if they're not going to go at the top end of Bednar, or even if they decide that they're not going to bring in Raisel, I think Maton would be a very good fit for your bullpen. And there's a couple other guys. What are your thoughts so far on these guys?
Yeah, my short list of relievers that I've been mentioning on this podcast over and over and over again, it's Ryan Helsley of the St. Louis Cardinals, a free agent after 2025. Raisel Iglesias, who you just mentioned, from the Atlanta Braves, a free agent after 2025. David Bednar, we've talked about him a little bit, from the Pittsburgh Pirates, free agent after 2026. And then Felix Bautista is a guy that I've been mentioning from the Orioles, but he just suffered an injury, so seems like he won't be traded. He's not even a free agent until after 2027. But yeah, Ryan Helsley, Raisel Iglesias, David Bednar, Felix Bautista, those have been maybe the bigger names that we've been discussing. And then I like the fact that you throw in Phil Maton as well. But is Ryan Helsley an option, right? And David Bednar, what would it cost to maybe go get a guy like that? And there's no chance that the Orioles will trade Felix Bautista now, right?
Yeah, the Orioles aren't going to trade him now. Another name in Baltimore that, again, doesn't move the needle, but Seranthony Dominguez. He's added a split finger fastball this year. He didn't really use it at the beginning of the season. However, he's been ramping it up to 20 and 30% usage rates, and he's getting a good amount of whiffs on it. And he's got 2 pitches with a swing strike percentage of 23% or higher with his slider and the split finger. So, I mean, he's not sexy. However, he does have a 1.152 whip since May 24th when he really started using the splitter more often when he got his first save for the Orioles this season. So he does have 2 saves, and in that time, he has 34 strikeouts against 11 walks. The good news about Helsley is that the price has come down. He's had a couple of struggles this year, although honestly, in the last 4 or 5 outings, he's really looked like the 2024 version of Helsley that people got accustomed to when he led the league in saves. And the swinging strike percentage has been 18% or higher in the last 2 months, June and July. So everything is pointing in the right direction. I think with the Cardinals, they would have to give up a couple of very good pitching prospects. The good thing about Atlanta is Atlanta's looking for middle infield help. And there's 3 different Tigers that Baseball America listed that Atlanta would be interested in. So they match up well on that trade. They mentioned Hu-Yu Lee, Jace Young, and Max Anderson as potential fits that could almost be a 1-for-1 for Raisel Iglesias if you want to do that. So, I mean, if you're willing to move one of those guys, I think you can make that happen for Raisel. And then, like I said, if you want to go get a top end guy or you want to get Dominguez or Matan to set up ahead of those guys or just use them as a 3-headed monster with Will Vest, then you've got something in that bullpen. It's a lot deeper. It's a lot more pliable. And then it addresses your needs for getting guys that can get whiffs.
You mentioned Raisel Iglesias, Phil Maton, but some other free agents after the 2025 season. We already talked about Ryan Helsley, but Shelby Miller, old friend of the Tigers, Sir Anthony Dominguez, who you touched on a little bit, Tyler Kinley, who has a team option for 2026, Jalen Beeks, maybe even Kyle Finnegan, although he doesn't miss bats. What do you think about the crop of pitchers who are going to become free agents? That they might come a little bit cheaper. You've already talked about some of them, but could Shelby Miller be an option? Could Sir Anthony Dominguez really be an option? What's there to know about Tyler Kinley? How about, Jalen Beeks? There are some other names out there who maybe could be fits for the Tigers.
Yeah. Jalen Beeks actually with how Brant Herter's been struggling a little bit this year, that would give you a second lefty in the bullpen, especially for leverage situations to take some of the pressure off Tyler Holton. I think that could be beneficial. I mean, you might be able to get a package of Beeks and Miller together. Again, if you're not going to shop at the top end, then you really want to accumulate depth. And as long as Miller and Beeks are healthy, both of them are on the injured list right now, but they both threw batting practice sessions on Friday. There's been no follow-up reports from the team. I'm hoping Arizona will activate one, if not both of them, for a day or two so they can showcase them and say, hey, these guys are healthy. So then scouts can weigh in on if they think they're worthy to be traded. The only other thing I have heard is that the Phillies have been asking about packaging Eugenio Suárez with Miller as a potential trade deal. But, all of these things are speculative. But all of the guys you mentioned, I think can fill a need. I just don't think they'll move the needle. If you don't get somebody like Helsley or Raisel, I mean, I know he doesn't generate whiffs, but Kenley Jansen's been fantastic in July. At least that's a name. So, I mean, I think the fan base wants to have somebody that they can hang their hat on and say, hey, we've got a guy to help stabilize the late innings. Whether it's the 7th, 8th, or 9th, these guys can come in and be effective. Now, again, Jansen would probably be best against right-handed hitting pockets, but, we all know AJ Hinch knows how to manage games to make those situations and put guys in situations where they can succeed. So as we go through the layers of all of this, I really think it would be a mistake with Tariq Skubal being so dominant that you don't get guys in that bullpen to help guarantee you get wins and not lose a 1-0 or 2-1 game in the playoffs when he's on the mound. You got to cash those outings in.
Well, the Tariq Skubal clock is ticking, and maybe that means the Tigers put their chips in a little bit more. I don't think they're going to do that. Again, I have not heard that they are going to go that route, but let's say that they have a change of heart here coming up to the trade deadline and they say, you know what, maybe we will give up one of our top 100 prospects to go out and get a legit dude, a controllable reliever. Who are some of those guys the Tigers should be targeting? Guys that could be in the Old English D for years to come. Your list includes guys like Ronnie Henriquez of the Miami Marlins, Seth Halverson of the Colorado Rockies, Jake Bird of the Rockies. And we talked about David Bednar and Dennis Santana of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And you even have Robert Suarez of the San Diego Padres on your list. Talk to me about Henriquez from the Marlins, Halverson and Bird from the Rockies, and what makes you think the Padres could move Robert Suárez at the trade deadline. And could those names be options for the Tigers if they decide, let's go all in for Tarik Skubal?
If they decide to go all in, and I mean, Suárez doesn't have the swing and miss stuff that some of the other guys do, but he just relies on his fastball mostly. He's a unique situation because the Padres are kind of up against it with the collective bargaining tax. They don't have a lot of flexibility with the payroll. Suárez is an opt-out at the end of the year, so he can become a free agent, as can Edwin Diaz. So I think that's why the Mets are so interested in Bednar, because they would have a fallback option in case Diaz wanted to test free agency or walked away. So those are always the sidebars to all these things. So there's a very good chance that San Diego, but I think San Diego would want somebody that they can use right now. So I don't know if that matches up well with Detroit. It would just kind of depend. I mean, we all know the Padres are searching for a left fielder. I don't know if there's an outfielder that the Detroit could give them to make that possibly happen. It really, AJ Preller's a wild card, but you can't ignore that because it's been written since the beginning of the year in the San Diego Union Tribune and other places that there comes a point where they might decide, because they have such good depth in their bullpen, that they could trade from a strength to address a weakness. So that's the only reason I list Suárez when I do these things, is because you have to have all of the possibilities out there on the table. There's always a surprise. And you said about a top 100 prospect. When I was going through the stuff on Baseball America to see the Tigers prospects and who they could possibly be floating out there in trade talks, there was no top 100 prospect traded last year for the first time in quite some time. I do think that will change this year. I think there'll be one or two that do get moved, because I think there's going to be a couple of teams that are desperate, especially Philadelphia, that they're going to be pushing the chips in at the table and being like, well, we're going to get our guy. So who's there after Philadelphia makes their move may set the whole market. It's going to be really, really intriguing to see how that falls out. As far as Kinley and Halverson, I would prefer Halverson. I mean, he's younger, controllable for a lot longer time. He ranks in the 100th percentile of velocity among relievers this year. I mean, he's averaging 100 miles per hour with his fastball. His command leaves something to be desired, but I think if you got him out of Coors, and he's another guy that has a very good split finger fastball, that's kind of the sexy pitch this year. So I think if he was able to get rested away from the Rockies, that he could find a new level of production, and he would be somebody that would actually fit your roster very well with the way his arsenal operates and the team that you would be able to put behind him. I just don't know if Colorado would do it, but stranger things have happened. Kinley's just kind of a grinder, but again, another guy that can get whiffs. He averages about 13 swing strike percentage, even over the last 365 days. So, I mean, he, again, not a sexy guy, but he's somebody that can get you outs in the 7th, 8th, or even the 9th inning when you're in a pinch. So there's something you said about having a veteran guy with velocity that can get whiffs. And again, anytime you get a reliever out of Coors, they usually find more success. Ronnie Henriquez was a DFA guy from the Twins. He's been having a nice season with the Marlins now today. He had a blown save in Milwaukee, but he's got 2 pitches also that are generating a lot of swinging strikes. And his best pitch has a over 20% swinging strike rate. So, I mean, again, if you're just seeing what's coming down the pike, these are just people that might be able to plug a hole. They're not sexy, but I think once they made a couple appearances, people are like, oh, okay, I can see where we have something with this guy.
Reed Detmers, another interesting name. He's just 26 years old, number 10 overall pick in the 2020 draft, under team control through the 2028 season, a failed starter who converted to the bullpen this season. He has a 4.08 ERA, but his underlying metrics seem to suggest that he's better than that. Is this someone to keep an eye on for the Tigers, a guy who has many years of control?
Yeah, if the Angels put him on the market, then absolutely, I would think the Tigers would be very interested in him. The Angels have a lot of needs in their farm system, so they might be able to match up with one of the middle infielder prospects we talked about and a pitching prospect, and they could be able to get Detmers over there. He's kind of he's not as good as Josh Hader, but he's kind of taken that path where he's adapted very well in the bullpen. And now that they've narrowed him down to like 1 inning outings, he's been very, very good. You know, part of that ERA was earlier in the year when he did a couple of extended outings and things of that nature. He wore a couple of them, but his recent appearances, he's been very, very good. One of the most underrated relievers, even from fantasy standpoint, that, you know, he gets a bunch of strikeouts and everything has transitioned well since he's made that switch.
Do you think the Athletics will trade Mason Miller? We talk about some of the elite relievers in the AL Central, and we know the Tigers won't go there because they don't want to trade in division. But you talk about Tarik Skubal, the timeline, where it's at. Like if the Tigers were ever to go like all in for a reliever, let's just say, which again, I do not expect them to do, but if they were to do it, Mason Miller would have to be that guy, right? And do you think he even gets moved, or is he staying with the Athletics long term?
The Athletics are playing this very close to the vest. You know, we know he's pitching through an injury, which is why he's not a starting pitcher, but he has not shown any, he had some slight bumps in early in the year. He was adjusting. I've heard a lot of reports about pitchers not liking the mound in Sacramento. It's awkward to land on and it's affected. You know, some pitchers are like, it affects me in outing after I get out of there because if you're landing bumpy and it's changing your release points, it kind of gets you out of your rhythm. Now, the only reason I say he could be moved is if there's just an offer that's overwhelming and you're looking at the stuff. He will be 29 and a pending free agent by the time they get in, the stadium opens in Las Vegas. So again, you've got a window with these guys. I believe the Cardinals made a mistake not trading Helsley in the preseason. If you weren't going to sign Helsley, they should have traded him when his value was the highest. You know, he has some struggles during the season. His whip is not pretty right now, even though I can tell you over his last X amount of outings, he's been very, very good. Teams still look at the thing and say, hey, he's got a 1.3 whip. I don't want 1.3 base runners per appearance. I know. So they're going to use that as a bargaining thing, not to give the Cardinals as much as they could have gotten in the preseason. But if you were going to do it with Miller, I think it's more likely they would trade him in the off season, like we talked about with Emmanuel Clase. However, like I said, if there's a team desperate enough to get him and they're willing to give one top 100 prospect and another very good one behind it, it would probably take 3 prospects in my estimation, or somebody that they could use right now in the rotation, which does match up a little bit. You know, if the Tigers gave up, say, Kaiser Montero and don't use him as a reliever and keep him, that could be somebody they could use as a part of a package to get Miller. And as you intimated, I don't see the front office doing it, but it's nice to speculate about.
So the relief pitcher is the most volatile position in baseball. We see ups and downs all the time. If the Tigers were to trade for a controllable reliever, maybe even somebody like a David Bednar, let's just say, they get a little bit more aggressive and they go for a David Bednar type, which I could see them doing that. How do you know or even begin to figure out if a reliever will be able to be successful for multiple years in the future when you're making a deal like this? Or do you just have no idea and it's a crapshoot?
Look at the track record. And that's part of the reason when I shared the spreadsheet with you, I gave you the last 365 days. So that's the last statistical year. So that's from a year ago this point to now, just to give you a wider range of a statistical output. So it's like, you know, all right, so David Bednar got demoted early in the year, but even when he got demoted, it was just a couple of rough outings. I was watching the one live. If a guy makes a play on the infield and doesn't throw a ball away, it ends up being a save and not a walk-off loss in Miami. It was just like everything that could go wrong for Bednar at the beginning of the season did. And they just kind of put him down in AAA to let him get a mental reset. And they brought him back and he's been fantastic again. So, you know, you can't guarantee that a reliever is going to be dominant. I mean, just look at Helsley's performance this year versus last year. League leader in saves to this year, like we talked about with the whip over 1.3. But, you know, usually these guys come back to what worked for them and you just have to ride out those blips. You know, just like I shared you with the splits with Will Vest. I can't explain why Will Vest has a 12.2 walk percentage in the 8th inning versus a 5.7 walk percentage in the 9th. It's very strange. And it's like, I almost feel like when they bring him in the 8th, it doesn't seem like it, but it's almost like he puts more pressure on himself because he's like, okay, I got to get past this inning, you know, and I think he tries too hard. And he's leaving balls in the middle of the plate and he's giving up too many hits in those moments. I think they just need to let Will be Will. And that's why I do believe getting 2 veteran relievers would really help stabilize so he doesn't feel that pressure at the back end. So he knows if I get through the 8th, I've got Raisel or I've got Phil or whoever I got Bednar waiting to get in there and they'll get those 3 outs for us. So I know I'm helping the team win.
We're going to get you out of here. But first, I want to look at what the Tigers have right now going into the trade deadline. Here are their 8 relievers in the bullpen. Will Vest, Tommy Kahnle, Tyler Holton, Brennan Hanafy, Brant Herter, Chase Lee, Luke Jackson, Dietrich Enns. What do you think about that group as a whole, and how does it stack up to the other 29 MLB teams?
It's, you know, as we highlight at the beginning, they do well when they can get games, and it's reliant on Holton and Kahnle when he's pitching well. And, you know, everyone goes through bumps in the road. And Vest, I think the soft, that bottom is very mushy, you know, and they need to in my estimation, I don't think Luke Jackson had a couple of rough outings in Texas. He had a rough debut in there. His K-BB percentage is not really what I prefer. You know, when I'm talking about getting good elite relievers, we use 20 K minus BB percentage. That's your strikeout percentage minus your walk percentage. That's kind of like a starting point for us. And then I go through the other things to kind of determine, what this reliever offers. But when your K minus BB is like 10 or less, it's danger zone because there's just too many people on base. You can't get people out by swing and miss. So you're relying on contact. And when you rely on contact, you get yourself into trouble. So I really think that's why I'm saying you need at least 2 veterans. If they could get a couple of minor trades to really just replace. You replace Ends with Beeks. You replace, Jackson with Matan. And then you replace one more reliever with Raisel or Bednar or whoever. Then you've got a bullpen, I think, that will match up with the other contenders in the American League in the playoffs. If they go into the playoffs with the bullpen as it's currently constructed, I don't think you're going to go far.
That was going to be my next question. Do you think the Tigers bullpen is capable of winning a World Series? So we will say absolutely not what they have right now, but maybe if they make some moves at the trade deadline. So Greg, before we get you out of here, you can only choose one. If the Tigers were to add just one reliever, who do you think the Tigers get at the trade deadline and why?
Who do I think they should get or will get?
Let's go with both.
In my estimation, I think they should go get Ryan Helsley, especially if you could get Helsley and Matan together as a package. You can almost work out with the Cardinals. We'll give you X, Y, and Z for these 2 guys on expiring deals. That's why I think they should do. I think they will end up with it. They match up so well with the Braves as a trade partner. I really think they'll end up with Raisel Iglesias. And if they do get Raisel, I'm okay with that. And then you have to make sure you get 1, if not 2 more of the guys we spoke about earlier that can do these 6th and 7th inning work. If the Tigers do that, I think that'll set them up well. I'm hoping they do it. I'd really like to see the Tigers invest in the roster that they have now and say, hey, we understand that we have a limited window. We're going to get you guys what you need to go take care of business.
All right, Greg, thank you for joining the Days of Roar podcast to discuss the relievers who could be on the trade block and what you think the Tigers need to do at the trade deadline, which is 6 p.m. Eastern, Thursday, July 31st. I really enjoyed having you on the show. Hopefully we can do this again at some point in the future.
I'd love it. Thank you for having me on, Evan.
Everyone, that was Greg Jewett, expert on all things relievers and bullpens. We have more to discuss this week about the Tigers, but first, let's take a break. All right. Thanks again to Greg Jewett for joining the podcast this week. One of the most important weeks of the season with the trade deadline within a few days. Before we wrap up, let's get into some news and notes from this past week in Tiger Town. Right-hander Troy Melton made his MLB debut, and he is joining the starting rotation. Melton made his debut July 23rd, that was Wednesday, against the Pittsburgh Pirates. The Tigers called him up from AAA Toledo. He's the number 6 prospect in that farm system, according to MLB Pipeline. Facing the Pirates, he allowed 6 runs on 7 hits and 2 walks. That doesn't sound good, but he also had 7 strikeouts all across 5 innings. He did struggle early on, but then he struck out 5 batters in his final 2 innings. We saw that fastball sit right around 97 miles an hour. It maxed out at more than 99 miles an hour. He generated 8 whiffs on 16 swings against his slider, as well as 3 whiffs on 12 swings against his fastball. So his fastball and his slider, those are both pitches that are capable of missing bats. And he also has another secondary pitch as well that misses bats. So he has 3 pitches that miss bats. And for me, one thing I like about Troy Melton the most is that he can miss bats with the fastball. It's always good to see from a young pitcher, especially at the big league level, right when they come up. If they're missing bats, that's a good sign. That's why there were a lot of concerns about Jackson Jobe, one of the top pitching prospects in baseball aside from Paul Skeens in recent history. Well, he struggled to miss bats with his fastball, not only at the big leagues, but also the AAA levels. Troy Melton has done that well. So I like that from Troy Melton. He can miss bats with the fastball. And yes, he gave up a solo home run on a first pitch to Mander McCutchen. Yes, he gave up a grand slam on a cutter that caught too much of the middle of the plate. But those were at the beginning of his outing. The middle and the end, he looked like a pitcher capable of starting in the big leagues. And that's why the Tigers are giving him some runway in the starting rotation, replacing Carter Montero, who is optioned to AAA Toledo. So Melton will start Monday against the Diamondbacks. And then we could see him again, maybe August 3rd, maybe August 4th, maybe August 5th against either the Philadelphia Phillies or the Minnesota Twins, depending on how the Tigers set the rotation coming out of the off day, which is the same as the trade deadline. Got to remember what Troy Melton did in AAA Toledo. He had a 2.72 ERA with 9 walks and 56 strikeouts across 36 1/3 innings in 8 games. He throws upper 90s with the fastball. He misses bats with 3 pitches. You can sign me up for that. Now, there are areas of concern. Too much hard contact, and also he struggles against left-handed pitchers. Those are things that I'll be watching for in his upcoming starts just to gauge what his role will be down the stretch and into the postseason. The best case scenario here is that Melton solidifies himself as one of the Tigers' 5 best starters. The worst case scenario, I don't think it get that bad, is the Tigers unleash this guy as a reliever in the postseason. I could see it either way, working out as him staying as a starter or maybe a slow transition into the bullpen for the playoffs. I probably lean a little bit more towards Melton becoming a reliever in the postseason. Even if he does establish himself as one of the top 5 starters, he still could get moved to the bullpen. The Tigers really think highly of Troy Melton. They like the fastball. It's really good. He misses bats. And again, when you look at that in a short spurt coming out of the bullpen in the playoffs, that could be really valuable. It even could be valuable if the Tigers go with the pitching chaos route where they throw, one of their traditional relievers for the first inning and then maybe somebody else for the second inning. And then maybe Troy Melton comes in and he takes down 4 or 5 innings. That could be a real role for Troy Melton. Or you could stick him at the back end of that bullpen and you could give him, hey, take down the 6th inning or take down the 7th inning. Those could be roles for Troy Melton in the postseason. But I think he has potential as a long-term starter in the future. I just think for right now, for where the Tigers are at, we'll see him in the rotation now, but maybe eventually he gets transitioned to the bullpen for the playoffs. Now we have the biggest news of the week. Kerry Carpenter is back. Outfielder Kerry Carpenter returned for Sunday's game against the Blue Jays following a 27-day stint on the injured list with a right hamstring strain. He hadn't played for the Tigers since June 29th. In his first game back, he went 0 for 3 with 2 strikeouts, and he is now hitting .254 with a .771 OPS this season. I'm just glad the Tigers finally got this hamstring issue taken care of. It dates back to early June. Kerry Carpenter tried to play through it for a month. He probably should have just shut it down right when it started, but all these guys are baseball players and baseball players want to play baseball. So I understand why he felt like he could push through it. He tried to mend it with treatment, ultimately became too much. He had to go on the injured list and he missed close to a month, but he's finally healthy. And as long as he produces, it's going to be good for Tigers fans to see him in the middle of the order against right-handed pitching. And it won't be good for opposing managers as they try to manage against Kerry Carpenter because he is a threat at all times and plays into the chess match of AJ Hinch when it comes to pinch hitters and how he likes to use his guys. He uses everybody. He's going to use everybody on the roster, and Kerry Carpenter is a key cog in the way in which AJ Hinch uses his lineup. So to create space for Carpenter's return, the Tigers optioned shortstop Trey Sweeney to AAA Toledo. That's not surprising at all. For the Tigers, Sweeney hit .208 with a .578 OPS in 85 games with just 5 home runs. So Kerry Carpenter in, Trey Sweeney out, and the Tigers lineup just got a whole lot better. And hopefully the return of Carpenter sparks the Tigers back into their winning ways. But to do that, the Tigers also need Riley Green to heat up. The only problem, Riley Green is trending in the wrong direction. So much so that he shaved his beard and left only a mustache. For those who don't know, Riley Green is very superstitious. He changes his walk-up song when he's down bad. And on only 2 occasions, April 2023 and July 2025, he rocked a mustache in search of escaping a really, really bad slump. In Sunday's game, which was Riley's first with the mustache, he finished 1 for 4 with 1 RBI and 1 strikeout. Only 1 strikeout. I guess that counts as progress. In his past 20 games, Riley Green is hitting .171 with 4 home runs, 4 walks, and 36 strikeouts. Yes, 36 strikeouts in 20 games. That dates back to Game 2 of the July 2nd doubleheader against the Washington Nationals. Riley leads MLB with 142 strikeouts in 104 games, and he is on pace for 215 strikeouts in 2025, which would be the most in Tigers history for a single season, ahead of Cecil Fielder's 182 strikeouts. So Cecil Fielder, 182 strikeouts, Riley Green on pace for 215 strikeouts. Riley Green is the best position player on the Tigers roster, but he's also a strikeout machine, especially right now. We will see if the mustache fixes that problem, but sometimes getting superstitious like that only makes things worse. All right, it's time to get out of here. Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Days of Roar. Please like, rate, share, and subscribe. Drop us a rating and a comment. for what you think about the show. Stick with freep.com/sports for the latest Tigers coverage. I'd like to thank the editor of the Free Press, Nicole Avery Nichols, sports editor Bill Bradley, and our magical producer, Robin Chan. For the Detroit Free Press, I'm Evan Petzold. We'll catch you next week. Until then, go in peace.